here today with Doug Farr, who's principal of Farr Associates in Chicago. He's one of the leading green architects in our city. He's a fellow of the American Institute of Architects and a fellow of the Congress for New Urbanism as well. And Doug and I are going to be talking about Carbon-Free Chicago 2050, a plan to decarbonize Chicago through something called the Common Agenda, a 5-point plan for decarbonizing the city and its environments. So joining me here is Doug Farr. Doug, tell us about Carbon-Free Chicago and the Common Agenda.
Robert, thanks for having me on the podcast. So Carbon-Free Chicago started in February, which seems like 10 years ago because it was pre-COVID. So we had a first kickoff meeting live in Chicago in my office. 65 people showed up, and there was just a spark of energy and enthusiasm about this issue of ridding the city of Chicago and our metro area economy, get out of the habit of burning fossil fuels in all kinds of ways. So that was the initial focus, and a lot of the folks involved in it, not surprisingly, are affiliated with the built environment, are the architects, engineers, developers, real estate folk, and or planners who are invested at the scale of urban fabric. So the built environment and buildings in particular has served as our kind of first area of focus. And this is actually important because 53% of the fossil fuel or the CO2 pollution produced in the city limits comes directly from buildings. So it's more than so that's a good place to start. And
so one of your starting points is to develop deep energy retrofits in existing buildings. So tell us what you mean by that, because we've written about it, but tell us what you mean.
Sure. So part of the premise of Carbon-Free Chicago is Chicago has been dormant in climate matters for almost 10 years since Mayor Daley stepped away from being mayor. We just haven't done much. We passed the benchmarking ordinance, which was a great step forward. It provided a transparent database to understand how larger commercial buildings in the city of Chicago use energy, how much they use comparatively, and so on. But otherwise, we've been sitting on our hands, and it's tragic.
And when you say Mayor Daley, of course, we're talking about Richard Daley, not his father. So.
Not the father. No.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, so we have been kind of losing some of our momentum in climate change. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So part of what we said was, let's imagine success, and the campaign gives ourselves a 30-year runway. So from 2020 to 2050. Which is longer than we would like it to take. The science suggests we would be really better served, all of us, all of humanity, if we could decarbonize faster than that, but that's a realistic ramp, is kind of the fastest I can imagine it happening. So we've given ourselves 30 years and said, well, let's imagine we were successful. What are the milestones? What are the markers of things that we would have certainly accomplished in those 30 years? And let's look at other cities that are way ahead of us in decarbonization efforts and figure out what they're doing already. So that's what got us to the list of sort of 5 measures, including deep energy retrofits. And so what we did was scan the country and figured out who the leaders are, mostly cities, and they're not surprisingly East Coast and West Coast. Though St. Louis is kind of nipping at our heels in one way. Basically said, what are all the kind of ordinances and policies and so on that the best cities have done? And so we'll talk about, since you asked about building energy performance standards, which is deep energy retrofits. And so to me, the kind of gold standard of that is from New York City. It's called Local Law 97. And it's a very slow acting but potent sort of fee or tax on energy used in larger commercial buildings in the city. So it was enacted in 2017, Local Law 97. In 2025, it imposes a beginning fee or tax on energy used in buildings. And then in 2030, it's an absolute hammer. It really comes down. The politics of how that was adopted in New York City, we're still learning kind of how that happened, but it really took a spine on the part of elected officials to pass it, because it really imposes some burdens on building owners, gives them a long time to do it, half a generation, 13 years, God knows, to retrofit these buildings to reduce their energy use. But indeed, by 2030, because of the severe penalties, buildings will get deep energy retrofits in New York.
All right, let's move on to some other. You also talk about a stretch energy efficient code for new construction in Chicago. What does stretch mean, and who's doing that well?
Right. So stretch is basically, there's a national energy efficiency code, the IECC, and
Right.
it's updated every 3 years, and the leading cities adopt the current one so that they're not meeting old standards. So that's pretty good. And not a lot of places are even doing that, but stretch is to go above and beyond that. So the places that are doing that the best, California, sad to say, they've just been ahead of us forever. So out there, starting in the late 70s, they had a statewide energy efficiency code that Title 24 that has been pushing the envelope
Right.
ever since. And so
Right.
everyone else is eating their dust and sort of trying to emulate the state code. And it wasn't simply a code, it was a whole infrastructure and apparatus for equipping the people to know how to meet the code, sometimes providing funding, sometimes adjusting the base building codes to eliminate barriers to achieving these outcomes. And so Chicago has done none of that. So we have some catching up to do. But
All
anyway,
right.
we are empowered to do that, and that's part one of our 5 points.
Okay. So you've got two points that relate to essentially getting rid of natural gas. One is electrification of new buildings and banning the installation of gas appliances, stoves, heating systems, and so forth. What have you got against natural gas?
Well, nothing. It's pretty great, other than the fact that it's polluting the planet and leaving our children and grandchildren a much diminished habitation. So here's a couple things. One is a lot of people hear like decarbonization. Oh, you mean solar panels, right? Well, that's part of it, but a lot of times people don't overlook the fact that the car they drive burns gasoline, and their house is heated and their hot water is heated by burning natural gas, fossil fuels. And so they somehow think that, solar panels will take the place of that. No. So technology has come forth in the last 5 or 10 years. It's just great technology now, using heat pumps rather than burning things. So heat pumps are all electric, and there's a hot water heater that's a heat pump, hot water heater.
Mhm.
Heat pump, clothes washing machine, clothes dryer, excuse me. And then there's induction cooktops, and then there's space heating that can be done with heat pump technology as well. So you can electrify an entire building and not need fossil fuel burning at all to be comfortable and meet your needs, and you can cut the gas service. And so Berkeley, California,
So you're saying that there is existing technology that would allow for the electrification of new buildings and banning of the installation of natural gas-based appliances. That's available.
Right.
Okay.
That's available. And Berkeley was the first municipality in the country to adopt an ordinance saying new buildings and major renovations will be prohibited from having gas connections. And so
Your last point, Doug, is the require zero energy ready homes. We don't cover homes that much in building design and construction. I did want to mention that point, but it's very important because there's so many, so much involved in the single family home.
I think we could all agree that these are inevitable, that as people come to understand the depth of change required to meet the climate emergency and to leave our children and grandchildren with a decent planet, we've got to stop burning fossil fuels. So it's going to happen eventually. And so the debate isn't whether it will happen, it's just how quickly it will happen. So that's the conversation. What we're trying to do is to shave decades off business as usual, the kind of timeline of business as usual, by kind of advocating, making the case for, making the connections and accelerating social change.
Thank you very much. I've been speaking with Doug Farr, principal at Farr Associates in Chicago, about Carbon-Free Chicago 2050 and the new carbon agenda that's a 10-year decarbonization plan. Thank you very much, Doug.
Thanks for having me.